In this video, you'll follow the emotional journey of Grace Thompson, an heiress who returns to her hometown after her father's death, only to find her family's legacy on the verge of collapse. The clothing and footwear store her father built with so much care is now drowning in debt, surrounded by secrets and betrayals. But what really happened while she was away? And most importantly, can Grace save not only the family business, but also the essence of everything it represented to the community? Grace makes a bold decision to assume a new identity and infiltrate the store as an employee. Through this process, she begins to uncover hidden truths and the wounds her father had been trying to heal for years. With each passing day, she connects more with the people who worked alongside her father and feels the weight of responsibility growing heavier. But what Grace didn't expect was that the closer she got to the truth, the harder it would be to face the decisions she'd have to make. In the end, Grace faces a shocking revelation that forces her to choose between loyalty to her father's legacy and compassion for someone unexpected. Is she ready to sacrifice everything for that legacy, or is the true value of the store far beyond its walls? Get ready for a heartfelt story, filled with mysteries, twists, and a conclusion that will leave you questioning how far you'd go to protect what truly matters. In the vibrant city of Worcester, Massachusetts, Christmas lights shone brightly along the streets, reflecting off the partially snow-covered sidewalks. It was Christmas Eve, and Thompson's clothing and shoe store, located in a bustling shopping district, was full of life. Grace, then only 8 years old, joyfully ran between the shelves, soaking in the energy and joy of the atmosphere. The sound of laughter, animated conversations, and the gentle jingle of Christmas bells filled the air. James Thompson, a man with a warm smile and ever-watchful eyes, was at the counter wrapping gifts with the care of someone who knew that every detail mattered. He was known in Worcester not only for the quality of the products he sold, but also for how he treated each customer as if they were part of the family.
"Grace, come here. I have something special for you,"
he called with the voice that always made the girl's eyes shine. Grace ran to him, her golden curls bouncing with each step, and stopped, breathless, at his side. James knelt down, meeting her eye level, and took out a snow globe carefully wrapped from inside the counter. Inside, a perfect miniature of Thompson's was surrounded by a wintry scene. Grace took the globe in her small hands, enchanted by the beauty and detail of the gift.
"One day, my dear,"
said James, stroking her curls,
"you will inherit not just this store, but the heart of every person who walks through those doors."
Grace's eyes sparkled with the promise contained in her father's words.
"I will take care of it as well as you do, Daddy,"
she replied with the innocence and determination that only a child could express. 20 years had passed since that Christmas, and Grace's life had changed drastically. Now 28 years old, she was living the fast-paced life of an executive in Boston, a bustling city far removed from the coziness of Worcester. The snow globe, once one of her greatest treasures, was now forgotten on a dusty shelf in her modern apartment, unused and uncared for. That day, while going through a stack of reports, the phone rang abruptly, interrupting her thoughts. She answered without much attention, but the words that came from the other end of the line made her freeze. Her father had suffered a stroke. The phone slipped from her hand, the sound blending with that of something falling in the room. The snow globe, forgotten and neglected, fell from the shelf, shattering into 1,000 pieces on the floor. The scene was a cruel omen of the rupture between Grace and her past, a bond she didn't know if she could repair. Hours later, Grace was in the hospital in Worcester, a city that now felt so distant from her reality, despite being the place where she had grown up. The hospital had an air of austerity. The corridors were quiet, and the atmosphere was heavy with the constant presence of pain and fear. She entered the room where her father was hospitalized, her heart tight. James Thompson, the man who had been a pillar in her life and in the community, looked unrecognizable in that hospital bed, his eyes closed and his body thin and fragile. She approached slowly, holding his hand, which was cold and lifeless, trying to find any sign of the vibrant man she had known. Suddenly, James's eyes opened, and he looked at her with a gaze that mixed love and sadness.
Grace.
He murmured, his voice weak and broken.
I'm here, Daddy. I'm here with you.
Grace replied, squeezing his hand, wishing she could push away the darkness that was closing in on them. James began to speak, but his words were interrupted by pain and fatigue. He mentioned the names of employees and customers, people Grace could barely remember.
They were like family. Don't let the heart of the store stop beating.
Grace tried to hold back her tears, but guilt overwhelmed her. She had drifted so far, so focused on building a career away from her roots, that she had lost sight of what truly mattered.
I shouldn't have left, Daddy.
She whispered, her voice choked, but it was too late. With one final gaze of love and concern, James closed his eyes for the last time. Now devastated, Grace felt completely lost. The store, her father's promise, everything he had built with such love and dedication was now in her hands. But she wondered, would she be able to honor that legacy? As she held her father's cold hand, Grace realized how far she had strayed from her father's dream and her own origins. Worcester, Massachusetts, felt a little less familiar as Grace watched the city through the taxi window. The last few days had been a blur of pain and regret. As the car approached the old neighborhood where she had grown up, she felt a mix of nostalgia and sadness. The taxi stopped in front of Thompson's, the store her father had managed with such care and dedication for decades. The store still maintained its elegance, with the windows carefully arranged, showcasing the latest collections of clothing and footwear that James Thompson had always chosen with great care. The facade was clean, and the store's sign still shone with the name Thompson's, as if insisting on preserving the dignity of a bygone era. However, there was something subtly wrong. The sign was slightly askew, a detail that James would have never allowed. The displays, although still attractive, lacked the same sparkle as before, as if missing the final touch of someone who truly cared. Grace stepped out of the taxi and pulled her suitcase, feeling the cold Worcester air on her face. She looked at the store, hesitating to enter. It was strange how a place that should be so familiar now seemed distant. Even with the facade still beautiful, something in the atmosphere felt different. There was a slight layer of dust in the corners of the windows, and the flowers in the vase by the door were starting to wilt. Small signs of neglect, perhaps imperceptible to most, but that screamed to Grace that something was missing, the soul her father had put into everything he did. For a moment, she felt like a stranger in her own inheritance, someone who no longer belonged to that world. From a distance, she could see some of the employees still trying to keep the store moving. They moved with practical efficiency, but without the energy and passion her father had always inspired. Grace sighed, the weight of responsibility beginning to settle on her shoulders. She knew she could no longer run away. It was time to face what she had left behind. The church in Worcester was full, but silence prevailed. The news of James Thompson's death had spread quickly, and it seemed that everyone in town felt the loss of a man who was not just a shopkeeper, but a pillar of the community. Grace entered the church and was met with curious and sympathetic glances. There was a sense of expectation in the air, as if people were waiting to see how she, the absent daughter, would handle the situation. She approached the casket, where her father's body was dressed in a suit he had rarely worn in life. James had always preferred comfortable, practical clothing, but there he was, formal and distant. Grace looked at his serene but motionless face, and a wave of pain washed over her. The last time she had been so close to him had been years ago, before she had moved away to build her career in Boston. As she stepped back, trying to find a place to sit and process her feelings, fragments of conversations around her began to reach her ears.
He was like a father to all of us,
said Nancy, one of the store's longest-serving employees, her voice full of emotion.
The store, it won't be the same without him.
Another employee commented with evident concern in their voice. These words felt like blows to Grace's heart. She knew her father was not just the owner of the store, but the soul of that place. James knew each customer by name, knew their stories, and made it a point to turn every visit to the store into a personal experience. The responsibility that now rested on her shoulders felt almost unbearable. Grace felt the pressure of expectations, not just to keep the store running, but to preserve her father's legacy. That night, after the wake, Grace found herself standing in front of the store once again. Worcester was quiet, the streets calm and covered by a light layer of snow. She took a deep breath and unlocked the door with the key she still kept with her. The sound of the lock turning was a reminder that this place was still hers, even though she had been away for so long. Upon entering, she was greeted by the familiar scent of leather and new fabric. The light still shone softly, reflecting in the carefully arranged displays. But there was something strange about being there without her father's presence. The shop, which he had kept so alive, now felt like an empty place, a reflection of what it had once been. Grace walked slowly through the aisles, observing the details. The clothes were still organized, the shoes arranged with precision, but the energy her father had always brought to the environment was missing. Every detail seemed to scream the absence of James. Arriving at the office, she found the room in order, almost as if her father would return at any moment. But something caught her attention. A small leather notebook partially hidden under a pile of papers. She picked it up, recognizing her father's handwriting on the cover. Diary. Grace hesitated before opening the notebook, fearing what she would find. But as she began to flip through it, she was surprised. She expected to find notes about sales, marketing strategies, task lists. Instead, she found stories. Stories about people, employees, customers, individuals he had helped over the years. Each page was a testament to her father's generous and compassionate heart. There were accounts of customers who came to the store just to chat, of the joy of helping a young woman find the perfect dress for her prom, of the satisfaction of giving a pair of shoes to someone who needed it more than they could afford. Grace felt tears fill her eyes. Her father had left a legacy that went far beyond the products he sold. He had created a place of refuge, of comfort, where people felt welcomed and respected. She allowed herself to fall into his chair, holding the diary against her chest as tears flowed freely. There, in that store that now felt so empty without her father, Grace realized the depth of what she had almost lost. That night, alone in the store her father had loved so much, Grace made a decision. She would not let James Thompson's legacy die. No matter how difficult it was, she was determined to honor her father's name and keep Thompson's alive, not just as a store, but as the heart of Worcester, as it always had been. The silence of the night enveloped Grace as she slept, but her mind was far from any rest. In her dreams, she was transported back to Thompson's store, but this time as the little 8-year-old girl joyfully running through the Christmas-decorated aisles. Everything felt so alive, so real. The store was exactly as she remembered. The shelves impeccably organized, the windows adorned with Christmas ornaments, and the distant sound of bells ringing in the background. Her father, James, was by her side, smiling with the same affection and pride he always carried.
"Come on, sweetheart, I want to show you something,"
he said, holding her small hand. They walked together through the aisles of the store, but as they moved forward, something magical began to happen. The shelves, which once displayed clothes and shoes, started to transform. Instead of products, Grace saw scenes of lives touched by her father. On the first shelf, she saw Nancy, the dedicated employee her father always treated like a daughter. Nancy was crying on one of those cold winter nights, and James, with his usual kindness, offered her comfort and support. On another shelf, she saw a young mother struggling to buy shoes for her son. James, noticing the difficulty, discreetly applied a discount, allowing the woman to leave the store with dignity and a smile on her face. Each scene unfolding before Grace's eyes revealed the true essence of what her father had built. It was not just a store, it was a place where lives were touched, where every customer was treated with humanity and compassion. Grace saw more and more of these stories materializing around her, each a testament to the profound impact James had on the community. She looked at her father, her heart full of love and admiration, but also of a growing pain.
Dad, I don't know if I can do this.
She whispered, her voice trembling with uncertainty. James turned to her, his eyes filled with understanding and affection.
You've always had everything you needed, my dear. Just believe in yourself.
Before she could respond, the dream began to dissolve, the images of the shelves and the touched lives fading like vapor. Grace woke up with a start, gasping, her heart pounding. The room was dark, but she felt a painful clarity taking over her mind. Tears streamed down her face as she got up, walking to the window and looking out into the darkness of the night. As comforting as her father's words in the dream had been, the fear of not living up to his legacy was overwhelming. She knew that taking over the store would be the greatest challenge of her life, but she also knew she could not simply let everything he had built disappear. The responsibility was immense, and Grace felt the weight of it more than ever. The next morning, still with the vivid dream in her mind, Grace arrived at the store before it opened. She wasn't sure how she would approach the situation, but she knew she needed to understand better what was happening with her father's business. Keeping to the shadows, she entered through the back door, avoiding being seen by the employees. Her discreet clothing and the way she moved made her almost invisible. Grace headed to the meeting room, where she knew Jack Miller, the manager, would be leading a meeting with the staff. She hid behind a wall in a position where she could hear everything without being noticed. The tone of the conversation was tense, and the atmosphere was charged with anxiety.
As you all know, sales have dropped drastically in recent months.
Jack began, his voice firm, but lacking the kindness James always displayed. And unfortunately, we are facing necessary cuts to keep the store running. There will be drastic changes in shifts, and some of you will have to accept different roles or reduce your hours. Grace felt a chill run down her spine as she heard Jack's words. She looked at the faces of the employees, people who had worked in the store for years, some of whom were practically part of the family. They were clearly worried, but more than that, there was a silent resignation, as if they were expecting this kind of thing after James's death. We are cutting the employee discount program, and year-end bonuses will be canceled. Jack continued. If anyone has a problem with this, my suggestion is to reconsider your position in the company. Grace observed the employees' reactions. Some lowered their heads, others exchanged glances, but no one dared to contest. It was as if the store, which once pulsed with her father's energy, was now under the command of a shadow that only drained its spirit. Jack's coldness and lack of consideration for the employees made Grace feel sick. This was not how her father would handle things, and she knew it. Back at her father's old house, Grace sat on the living room sofa, a place that still exuded his presence. The walls were adorned with old photos, happy moments, family trips, and of course Thompson's store in different phases of its history. The atmosphere, though familiar, felt laden with a nostalgia she couldn't shake off. She picked up the phone with trembling hands, hesitating for a moment before dialing her boss's number in Boston. The familiar voice answered on the other end, surprised to hear Grace so early.
Grace, what's wrong? Is everything okay?
He asked, unaware of the whirlwind of thoughts and emotions that haunted her. Grace took a deep breath, feeling the gravity of what she was about to do.
I need to resign.
She said, her voice firm but filled with a new determination. There was silence on the other end, and then her boss replied, incredulous.
Resign? Grace, you're one of the best executives we have. What's going on?
She closed her eyes, feeling tears threatening to return, but she held them back.
My father passed away, and I need to go back to his store. I need to understand what he built and take care of it. It's something I can't ignore.
Silence returned, this time more prolonged, and Grace knew her boss was processing what she had just said.
I understand,
he said finally, his tone indicating he wouldn't try to convince her otherwise.
but know that the doors will always be open for you here, Grace. I wish you the best.
Thank you.
Grace replied, feeling a wave of relief and fear at the same time. She hung up the phone and sat for a moment, allowing the magnitude of her decision to hit her completely. She had just left behind a brilliant career in Boston, a life she had worked so hard to build, to take on a responsibility that terrified her deeply. But Grace knew it was the only right thing to do. Her father had built something special, something that had touched many lives, and now it was her turn to ensure that it did not get lost. Determined, she began to outline a plan in her mind. She would infiltrate the store, working as a common employee, to see firsthand the challenges her father faced daily, and perhaps find a way to restore the heart of Thompsons. It was a bold decision, perhaps even crazy, but Grace felt it was the path she needed to follow. She was ready to face any challenge, to honor her father's legacy, and discover if she had the same strength and compassion he had always shown. In the small bathroom of her father's house, Grace stared intently at the mirror. Her eyes revealed a determination she hadn't felt in a long time. She spent hours transforming her appearance, each step a symbol of her decision to leave behind the Boston executive and embrace a new identity. She dyed her hair a dark brown, quite different from her usual light blonde. She put in green contact lenses, which radically changed the look she knew so well. She practiced a different, more neutral accent, erasing the traces of her life in Boston. To complete the disguise, she put on a pair of simple framed glasses that obscured her true identity even further. When she finally finished, she looked at herself in the mirror and almost didn't recognize herself. There was Emily Sullivan, a version of herself that could have been if she had stayed in Worcester, someone average, without the weight of a significant legacy. The transformation was complete, and Grace felt a mix of anxiety and excitement thinking about what was to come. The next morning, Grace, now Emily, walked into Thompson's store with hesitant steps. She carried a fake resume that detailed a simple life without great ambitions or achievements. As she approached the human resources counter, she found Sandra, a weary employee with a face etched with fatigue. Sandra barely lifted her eyes from the papers in front of her, limiting herself to asking,
"Can I help you?"
Emily began to tell the story she had carefully prepared. A single mother, new to the city, desperate for any job she could find to support herself and her small daughter. Her voice was low, humble, and each word seemed to weigh with a sincerity that finally made Sandra look up. Sandra observed her for a moment, assessing the woman in front of her. Perhaps it was the combination of Emily's tired appearance and the tone of desperation laced in her voice, but something in the story seemed to touch Sandra.
"We have a janitor position in a trial period,"
she said, handing over a form.
"It's not glamorous, but it's honest work."
Grace, as Emily, accepted the offer with apparent gratitude, feeling the first wave of success in her new mission. As she filled out the forms, Emily looked around, discreetly recognizing some faces. They were employees she had seen in the photos in her father's album, people who had dedicated years to the store. The reality of her decision began to weigh on her. She was about to enter a world she only knew through the stories and memories told by her father, but now she would have to discover and understand it on her own. Every face, every detail in the store connected her to her past, but also distanced her, as she was now a stranger in that world that had once been hers. Grace's first day as Emily Sullivan at Thompson's store began with an emotional weight she hadn't anticipated. Wearing the simple janitor uniform, consisting of gray pants and a plain navy blue t-shirt with no logo, made her feel like an imposter. The rough fabric against her skin was a constant reminder that she was hiding, not only from the people around her, but also from herself. Grace was used to sophisticated clothing and luxurious environments, but now she found herself cleaning windows and sweeping floors that were technically part of her heritage. As she walked through the aisles, the feeling of alienation grew. With each simple task, like emptying trash cans or cleaning the windows, she felt a tightness in her chest. The store that her father had lovingly and diligently built now felt like an unfamiliar place, and the uniform made her feel even more distant from everything that had once been part of her life. But the hardest part was facing the looks of the employees who saw her only as Emily. They didn't know who she really was, and that made her feel disconnected from her own story. Grace felt the weight of her father's legacy, and at the same time, the guilt of having drifted so far away, which made her question whether she was making a mistake by returning incognito. During orientation, Grace was introduced to the head janitor, Carlos. He was an elderly man with brown skin and gray hair with kind eyes that seemed to carry the wisdom of years of work and experience. As he began to speak, his calm and welcoming voice brought forth painful memories of her father. There was something about Carlos that reminded her of James Thompson, perhaps the same patience and kindness he always showed to the store's employees. As they walked through the aisles during orientation, Carlos began to share stories about the former owner.
Mr. Thompson was a good man,
he said with a nostalgic smile.
He always treated us like part of the family. I remember when he helped me find a doctor for my wife when she got sick. He never hesitated to help.
Every word from Carlos felt like a stab of guilt in Grace's heart. Knowing that her father had touched so many lives so positively only added to the burden she carried. She wondered if she would ever be able to fill the void left by him and if she would ever be worthy of continuing the legacy he had built. Carlos's kindness made her feel small, as if she were deceiving everyone by pretending to be someone she wasn't.
He made a point to know every person who walked through those doors, you know? And he always said that the store was just a part of what he wanted to leave for people. The most important thing was the feeling of community.
Grace could barely respond, just nodding her head, trying to hold back the emotions that threatened to overflow. At the end of the day, Grace was assigned to clean the restrooms in the store. It was a simple task, but it required attention to detail, something her father always valued. As she scrubbed the tiles and cleaned the mirrors, she heard snippets of conversations coming from the hallway. Two teenage girls were animatedly discussing the upcoming school dance.
I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't have money for a dress.
One of them said, her voice sad. Grace paused for a moment, feeling an almost uncontrollable urge to help. Her mind went back to a time when her father had helped a customer in a similar situation, giving her a dress from the store without charging her. But she knew that as Emily, she couldn't do that. Any grand gesture would raise suspicions and jeopardize her disguise. Still, the words of the teenage girls stayed with her as she finished cleaning. The desire to intervene, to do something that would make a difference in people's lives, was overwhelming. Grace had returned to the store not just to save a business, but to continue her father's work, which was to help others in meaningful ways. But at that moment, she was limited by her new identity. When the girls walked away, Grace looked in the mirror, which now reflected not only her altered appearance but also her new reality. She was caught between two lives, that of Emily, an ordinary employee who needed to remain anonymous, and that of Grace Thompson, heir to a legacy of compassion and generosity. The conflict between these two identities was a constant struggle, but she knew she needed to keep going. Maintaining the disguise was essential to understanding the real challenges the store faced and eventually finding a way to restore the heart of Thompson's without compromising her mission. As she finished cleaning, Grace made a silent pact with herself. She would find a way to help without revealing her true identity. Her father had touched many lives with small acts of kindness, and she was determined to do the same, even if she had to be subtle about it. The day had been emotionally exhausting, but at the same time, it reinforced her decision to move forward with her plan. Grace knew that the first steps in unfamiliar ground were always the hardest, but they were also the ones that paved the way for something greater. The days passed slowly for Grace in her new identity as Emily Sullivan. Each day brought new challenges, but also new discoveries about the store and the people who worked there. It was during one of those routines, while reorganizing the cleaning closets, that she overheard a conversation that left her deeply disturbed. Anna, one of the longest-serving employees at Thompson's, was on the phone, her voice low and tense. Grace couldn't hear all the details, but the words, Treatment, oncologist, and cancer jumped out at her. When Anna hung up, she leaned against the wall, her shoulders slumped from exhaustion. Grace realized that something was very wrong. She approached Anna cautiously, trying to hide her concern behind the mask of Emily.
Are you okay?
She asked, feigning casual curiosity. Anna forced a smile, but it was evident that she was struggling to maintain appearances.
Oh, yes, I'm fine. Just a little tired, you know?
Grace noticed the shadow of pain in Anna's eyes and her heart ached. In that moment, Grace remembered how her father always took care of his employees, treating them like family. He would have done anything to help Anna, and Grace felt an immediate connection to the situation. She desperately wanted to help, but knew she needed to be careful not to raise suspicions about her true identity. Grace decided that she would find a way to support Anna discreetly, without anyone realizing that Emily was more than just a simple employee. But the feeling of helplessness was strong, and Grace found herself once again confronted with the difficult reality of her situation. The next morning, as she finished cleaning the aisles, Grace heard a loud, angry voice coming from the stockroom. She followed the sound and found Jack Miller, the manager, severely reprimanding Miguel, a young stock clerk. Miguel stood with his head down as Jack accused him of an apparently trivial mistake, an item out of place in the stockroom.
Do you think you can just do whatever you want around here? This is unacceptable. Do you think you can just do whatever you want around here? This is unacceptable.
Jack raged, completely ignoring the fact that the mistake was insignificant and easily fixable.
If you can't do this job right, maybe you should look for another place.
Grace stood hidden behind a shelf, watching the scene with a churning stomach. Jack's cruelty disgusted her, and she remembered a similar situation from her childhood when she had made a mistake in the store. On that occasion, her father, instead of reprimanding her, encouraged her, showing her how to fix the mistake and learning together from the experience. When Jack finally left, leaving Miguel visibly shaken, Grace seized the opportunity to approach him.
Hey, are you okay?
She asked, her voice soft and full of empathy. Miguel lifted his head, surprised to see her there.
Yeah, I'm just not used to this kind of thing,
he admitted, trying to hide his frustration. Grace placed her hand on Miguel's shoulder, a simple gesture that carried her father's intention of always supporting others.
We all make mistakes. Don't let this get you down. I know you're doing your best,
she said, offering a comforting smile. Miguel returned the smile, albeit weakly, and thanked her before going back to work. Grace, for her part, was left with a feeling of frustration and sadness. She knew that Jack was undermining the employees' morale and turning the store into a place her father would never have approved of. This only increased her determination to find a way to change the course of things. Later that day, during the lunch break, Grace decided to sit with the other employees in the cafeteria. The space was simple, with plastic tables and worn chairs, but there was an atmosphere of camaraderie that made her feel a little less isolated in her new identity. She grabbed a tray of food and chose a table where some employees were already sitting, chatting amongst themselves. As they ate, the conversations began to revolve around the store and the impact it had on each of their lives. Grace listened attentively, absorbing every word.
I was in a tough situation a few years ago. I didn't know if I could pay the rent.
One of the employees said,
But Mr. Thompson gave me an unexpected bonus and helped me through that time.
Another employee, an older man who had been at the store for decades, shared a story about how James Thompson had helped finance his daughter's education, never expecting anything in return.
He always said that the store was a place to make a difference in people's lives, not just to sell products,
the man commented with a nostalgic smile. Grace felt tears welling up but held them back. Hearing those stories reignited her passion for the family business and strengthened her determination to save it. She realized that Thompson's was much more than just a business. It was a vital part of the community, a place where people felt valued and supported. When lunch ended and the employees returned to work, Grace sat for a moment alone, reflecting on everything she had heard. She knew there was much work ahead, but she also knew she was not alone. The connection she felt with the employees, even though they didn't know who she really was deep and true. And deep down, Grace knew she was exactly where she was meant to be, in the store her father had built, trying to honor his legacy in the best way possible. The days at Thompson's were becoming increasingly difficult for Grace in her disguise as Emily Sullivan. Jack Miller, the store manager, seemed to be always lurking, ready to catch her making a mistake, no matter how small. Grace noticed the growing suspicion in his eyes, but she was not prepared for what he had planned. It was an afternoon like any other when suddenly a commotion began in the aisle near the stockroom. Jack appeared, his face filled with fury, holding a pair of expensive shoes that, according to him, were about to be stolen.
Someone tried to steal this. Someone tried to steal this.
He announced loudly, attracting the attention of all the nearby employees. Before anyone could react, he turned to Grace, or rather to Emily.
You! I saw you near the stockroom just before this happened.
He accused, his eyes narrowed in disdain.
What do you have to say about that?
Grace froze. Shock and indignation hit her hard. She opened her mouth to defend herself, but the words wouldn't come out. Around her, the looks from the other employees, whom she had begun to consider allies, were filled with disappointment and distrust. Anna, who had always treated her kindly, had a look of sadness on her face, while Carlos, who had shared so many stories about his father, seemed incredulous. The trust they had begun to place in Emily was quickly evaporating.
I didn't do it.
She finally managed to murmur, but her voice sounded small and powerless against Jack's accusation.
I wouldn't do something like that.
That's what everyone says.
Jack replied coldly, and without further ado, announced that Emily would be suspended while he investigated the alleged theft. The public humiliation was overwhelming, and Grace felt the weight of failure. She desperately wanted to reveal her true identity, to end the charade, but she knew that would compromise her entire plan. With a heavy heart, Grace left the store under the disappointed gazes of her colleagues, feeling more alone than ever. The Worcester Cemetery was a quiet place, where silence was interrupted only by the gentle sound of the wind among the trees. Grace walked slowly to her father's grave, thoughts swirling in her mind. She had failed, and the pain of it was almost unbearable. Arriving at the grave, she knelt down, finally letting the tears flow freely.
Dad, I don't know what to do.
She whispered, her voice trembling with emotion.
I thought I could do this, that I could honor your legacy, but now, I'm so lost.
The confession came out in sobs, the truth of her fears finally manifesting. She ran her hands over the name engraved on the headstone, feeling more connected to him at that moment than at any other time since his death.
All I wanted was to make you proud, but it seems like I'm just complicating things. I miss you so much. I wish I could ask for your advice, hear your voice telling me that everything will be okay.
Grace stayed there, kneeling on the cold grass, talking to her father as if he were by her side.
I need strength, Dad. I don't know if I can keep going, but I can't give up now. Show me the way, please.
Her words were carried away by the wind, and in the silence that followed, she felt a soft breeze, like a touch of comfort. While still kneeling before the headstone, Grace heard soft footsteps approaching. She turned quickly and saw Anna, who had an expression of gentleness and concern.
Emily, or should I say Grace?
Anna said, her voice low but full of understanding. Grace froze for a moment, the shock of being discovered leaving her speechless.
You knew?
She whispered, trying to process what that meant. Anna smiled, but it was a sad smile.
I knew from the first moment we talked. There are things that the eyes and heart pick up that words cannot hide. You have your father's eyes, Grace. I worked alongside him for years, and I would recognize that look anywhere.
Grace felt the tears begin to flow again, but this time it was more from relief than sadness.
Why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you expose me?
Anna sighed, taking a few steps forward until she was beside Grace.
Because I wanted to see what you would do. I wanted to see if you were really here for the right reasons. And I knew this was something you needed to do on your own.
Grace lowered her head, shame and gratitude mixing in her chest.
I don't know what to say. I'm trying to do what's right, but everything seems to be falling apart.
Anna placed a gentle hand on Grace's shoulder.
You're doing the best you can, and that's what matters. Your father would be proud of you, Grace, for wanting to continue his legacy. But you don't have to carry this burden alone.
Hesitating for a moment, Grace looked directly at Anna, her expression serious.
Anna, I know about your cancer.
The words were hard to say, but Grace knew she needed to be honest.
I know you're trying to keep this a secret, but please, don't do that. If you need help, you can count on me. No matter what happens, I'll be here for you, just like my father would be.
Anna shook her head, her eyes shining with unshed tears.
You are so much like him. But don't worry, I'm doing my best to take care of myself. I still have many things to do, and so do you. We'll get through this together.
The bond between them strengthened in that moment. There were no more disguises, just two women fighting to do what was right in a world that often seemed against them. Grace knew that with Anna by her side, she had the strength to carry on, no matter what the future held. As they said their goodbyes, Grace looked at her father's gravestone one more time, feeling a renewed sense of determination. With Anna knowing her true identity and offering her support, she knew that even with all the challenges ahead, she was not alone. Her father's legacy lived on, not just in the store, but in the people he had touched, and together they would ensure that legacy endured. Determination coursed through Grace's veins as she resumed her mission, now clearer than ever. Knowing that Jack was a threat not only to her but to her father's legacy, Grace decided that the only way to save Thompson's was to expose the truth about him. But this would require a careful and discreet approach. Any wrong move could jeopardize everything. In the days that followed, Grace, still in her disguise as Emily, began to investigate every possible detail. During the nights when the store was quiet and deserted, she rummaged through old and recent documents, looking for any discrepancies. Jack's office, which often remained empty after he left, became a point of interest. There she found papers and reports that made no sense, figures that didn't add up, transactions that seemed fabricated, and absurdly high expenses. More than that, Grace began to overhear whispered conversations among the staff. Small details that might have gone unnoticed before now made sense. Jack had created an atmosphere of fear and submission, where anyone who opposed his corrupt practices was quickly silenced or pushed aside. But among those murmurs, Grace also discovered something that gave her hope. There were employees who, in silence, resisted Jack's orders, trying to keep alive the essence of the store her father had built. These fragments of resistance, though fragile, showed that not everything was lost. As Grace delved deeper into the investigation, an unexpected ally emerged. Miguel, the young stock clerk who had been humiliated by Jack, approached her one afternoon when they were alone in the stockroom. He looked around to ensure no one was watching, and then, in a low and urgent tone, began to speak.
Emily, I know you're not like the others. When Jack humiliated me, you were the only one who cared. And I need to tell you something.
He said, nervous but determined. Grace looked at Miguel, feeling a mix of surprise and relief.
What is it, Miguel? You can trust me.
Miguel took a deep breath and continued.
Jack, he's not who he seems to be. I've started to realize that some time ago. He manipulates the store's finances, makes deals behind the scenes, and siphons off money. I've heard conversations, seen documents. He's slowly draining the store, and no one seems to notice because everyone is afraid of him.
Grace felt her heart race. It was the confirmation she needed.
Why are you telling me this, Miguel? You know you're risking your job.
Because I can't stay silent anymore.
He said firmly.
Mr. Thompson was a good man. He gave me a chance when no one else believed in me. I can't let what he built be destroyed by someone like Jack. And I think you, Emily, you can do something to stop this.
Miguel's courage touched Grace deeply. She knew that by revealing this information, he was putting everything at risk, but he was willing to do it out of loyalty to her father. Grace promised herself that she would protect Miguel no matter what happened. She now had the pieces she needed to unmask Jack, but she knew she would need more support to execute her plan. With the crucial information Miguel had provided and the data Grace had collected over the past weeks, she knew it was time to act. She needed to start building a movement within the store that was strong enough to oppose Jack and reverse the course of things. She decided to organize a secret meeting with the most loyal employees, those who she knew still carried in their hearts the spirit her father had cultivated. The meeting was scheduled to take place after the store closed, in a small break room in the back, away from Jack's watchful eyes. Grace arrived early, disguised as Emily, and prepared the space. Anxiety gnawed at her inside, but she knew it was a pivotal moment. The employees arrived one by one, suspicious but also curious. Among them were Anna, Carlos, Miguel, and a few others whom Grace knew shared the desire to save Thompsons. When everyone was present, Grace closed the door, ensuring no one outside could hear the conversation. She took a deep breath and began to speak, carefully choosing her words to avoid revealing her true identity.
I know many of you are concerned about what's happening here at the store.
Grace began, her voice calm but full of purpose.
I am too. We all feel that something is wrong, that things aren't as they should be. But I want you to know that there is still hope.
The employees exchanged glances, some intrigued, others cautious. Grace continued.
Over the past few weeks, I've seen how much you care about this place, how much you care about each other. And that's what gives us a chance to save Thompsons. We are not alone in this.
Miguel, who already knew more than the others, stepped forward to support Grace.
Emily is right. I've seen things that aren't right too. If we unite, we can make a difference. We can fight to keep this store what it has always been, a place where people feel valued.
Miguel's words seemed to embolden the others. Carlos, with his deep voice, added,
I've worked here for many years. I've seen this store go through good times and bad, but I've never lost faith. Now, we all need to come together, like we did in the past, and fight for this.
The meeting, which had started as a strategic session, gradually transformed into something deeper. The employees began sharing stories about James Thompson, about how he had touched their lives in ways that went far beyond a simple job. Anna, emotional, spoke about the silent support she had always received from James, especially during difficult times. As the stories flowed, the atmosphere in the room began to change. The spirit of community, which had seemed dormant since James's death, started to awaken again. Grace watched in silence, touched by the passion and loyalty of the employees. Even without knowing who she really was, they opened up and connected on a deeper level. By the end of the night, what had begun as a tense meeting had transformed into a rebirth of the spirit that James Thompson had created at Thompson's. Although Grace hadn't revealed her true identity, she felt that an important step had been taken. The store, which had been on the brink of losing its essence, now had a real chance to be saved, not because of a name or a person, but because of the collective strength of those who still believed in the legacy that James had left behind. Still disguised as Emily Sullivan, Grace knew that the next step to restore the spirit of Thompson's required more than just exposing Jack. She needed to reconnect the store with the community, something her father had always prioritized. Inspired by the stories she had heard from the employees, especially Anna's personal challenge, Grace had an idea that could reignite the bond between the store and the residents of Worcester. One day, during a meeting with the staff, Grace suggested an initiative that at first glance seemed simple but had a profound purpose.
What if we organized a fundraising event? Something that really shows that Thompson still cares about the community.
She suggested, trying to sound casual.
We can start with a cause that we can all unite to support.
The idea was met with a mix of surprise and interest.
And what would that cause be?
Asked Carlos, curious. Grace looked at Anna, who avoided her gaze, trying to hide the emotion that was beginning to take over her.
We could raise funds for cancer treatment.
Grace continued, her voice low and thoughtful.
It's a battle many face in silence, but it could use all the support possible.
Anna, touched by the suggestion, finally looked up at Grace. She knew Grace was speaking directly about her own struggle, and Grace's delicacy in addressing the issue without publicly exposing Anna moved her.
That would be amazing.
Anna said, her voice choked. The other employees quickly agreed, recognizing the importance of bringing the community back into the store. The plan was quickly laid out, a charity night, where all sales proceeds would go to a cancer treatment fund. Additionally, there would be raffles, voluntary donations, and even a small live music performance. It would be an event that united the community around a noble cause, while simultaneously showing that Thompson's was still a pillar of support in Worcester. The charity event took place on a cold night, but there was a warmth in the air that emanated from the people who began to gather in front of Thompson's store. The display lights were on, and the interior of the store had been transformed into a cozy space, with simple yet meaningful decorations reflecting the cause for which everyone was there. As she walked through the store, helping wherever she could, Grace noticed the number of people who came to support the event. Among the familiar faces, one caught her attention. Sarah, a woman who seemed a bit nervous but determined. Grace, in her role as Emily, approached to offer help.
Hi, can I help with something?
Grace asked, trying not to show her curiosity. Sarah looked at Grace and smiled shyly.
Actually, I just wanted to thank you for everything this store has done for me and my daughter.
Grace was intrigued and encouraged Sarah to continue.
What happened? I would love to hear your story.
Sarah took a deep breath before speaking.
A few years ago, I was going through a very tough time. My daughter Kelly was about to graduate high school, and she wanted so much a beautiful dress for the prom. But I just couldn't afford it. I walked into the store to look, even knowing I couldn't pay, and when we were leaving, someone handed us a package. Inside was a wonderful dress, exactly what my daughter wanted. I don't know who did that, but that act of kindness changed our lives. Kelly was so happy, and it gave us hope to move forward.
Grace felt a lump in her throat as she listened to the story. She knew exactly who had given that dress. Her father always had an eye for others' needs and never hesitated to help anonymously.
That's amazing.
Grace said, her voice trembling.
You know, this store was built to be a place where people could find more than just clothes or shoes. It was built to be a place of hope.
Sarah nodded, her eyes filled with gratitude.
And that's exactly what we found here. I hope this store continues for many years so that others can feel what we felt.
Despite the success of the event, the following days brought bad news. The possibility of Thompson's going bankrupt began to spread through the town, a rumor that seemed to circulate faster than any effort Grace made to combat it. The store, which had been a symbol of stability for so many decades, was now on the brink of closing its doors. But something unexpected happened. Instead of accepting the store's fate with resignation, the Worcester community began to mobilize. People started gathering in front of the store, sharing their stories and memories of how Thompson's had touched their lives. Each person who arrived brought a new story, a new testament to the impact James Thompson had left on the town. Grace, still in disguise, watched from afar, moved by what she saw. There were families sharing how James had helped in times of need, young people remembering receiving unexpected gifts, and even elderly folks talking about how the store had been a meeting point during their youth. Slowly, a small crowd began to form. It was not a protest but a silent vigil, a demonstration of support and love for a place that meant so much to everyone. In that moment, Grace realized the weight and privilege of the legacy she carried. The Thompson store was not just a business, it was the heart of the community, a place where lives were touched and dreams nurtured. As people continued to gather, Grace felt a new determination rise within her. Her father's legacy was still alive, and it was her responsibility to ensure it continued to thrive. She was not alone in this fight. The community was with her, and together they would find a way to save the store and keep alive the spirit that James Thompson had cultivated for so many years. This was the moment Grace had been preparing for since she began her investigation. The Thompson store was closed to customers, but she knew Jack Miller would still be in the office, reviewing the documents that maintained his impeccable manager facade. With the carefully collected evidence in hand and her disguise finally discarded, Grace entered the office with firm steps, ready to confront the man who threatened to destroy her father's legacy. When Jack looked up and saw her, his expression changed from surprise to confusion, and finally to anger.
What are you doing here, Emily? You shouldn't be here after what happened.
He said, but there was a hesitation in his voice. Grace stared at him with a steady gaze.
I'm not Emily, Jack. My name is Grace Thompson. And I know everything.
Jack's face went pale, the reality of the situation finally hitting him. Grace placed the documents on the table, each detailing Jack's corrupt practices, from embezzlement to illegal deals he had made for his own benefit.
I found out everything. You've been siphoning money from the store, little by little, without anyone noticing, until now.
Jack tried to maintain his composure, but it was clear he was falling apart. He started to tremble, and unexpectedly his defenses crumbled.
I had no choice.
He confessed, his voice weak.
They threatened my son. He's sick, and I needed the money to pay for his treatment. I didn't know what to do.
Shock washed over Grace. She hadn't expected this revelation. For a moment, the conflict in her heart intensified. She had come determined to take Jack down, but now she found herself facing a desperate man, a father trying to save his son. This moment humanized Jack, and Grace felt her compassion being tested. But there was something she couldn't overlook. Despite Jack's desperate situation, he had betrayed the trust of everyone in the store and nearly destroyed her father's legacy.
I understand your situation, Jack.
Grace said, her voice firm but gentle.
But that doesn't justify what you did. You put everyone here at risk, compromised the integrity of the store my father built. I can't let this go.
Jack lowered his head, knowing there were no more excuses.
I'm sorry,
he murmured, tears beginning to stream down his face.
I just wanted to save my son.
Grace sighed, struggling against the emotions bubbling inside her.
You won't be turned over to the police, Jack. But you're fired, effective immediately. I suggest you use the time you have left to be with your son and seek help the right way. I will ensure you have the necessary support for his treatment, but you can't stay here any longer.
Jack looked at her, incredulous, and finally nodded.
Thank you,
he said in a whisper barely audible, before getting up and leaving the office, his figure hunched under the weight of his guilt and regret. Shortly after, Grace gathered all the employees in the meeting room. The tension in the air was palpable. No one knew exactly what was happening, but everyone felt that something big was about to be revealed. When Grace entered the room without the disguise of Emily, she felt the curious and confused gazes upon her. She took a deep breath and began to speak.
My name is Grace Thompson, and I am the daughter of James Thompson. I returned to save this store, but also to understand what it means to all of you, to me, and to the community.
The employees' expressions changed from surprise to shock as Grace continued.
I disguised myself as Emily because I needed to see with my own eyes what was happening here. I needed to feel what my father felt, understand the struggles he faced, and above all, rediscover the love he had for this place and for all of you. What I found was much more than I expected. I found a family that my father created, a spirit that I almost let die.
She paused, feeling the weight of the words she had been saying, and then looked at each face in the room.
Jack was fired today. He betrayed the trust of all of us, but instead of turning him over to the police, I decided to give him a chance to save what truly matters to him, his family. I know this may seem wrong to some, but I did what I felt my father would do.
The silence that followed was deafening. Grace expected reactions, but she didn't know what would come next. She had just opened her heart and exposed her journey, her fears, and her discoveries. Now all she could do was wait. The silence seemed to last an eternity until Carlos, the head janitor, was the first to speak up. He stood slowly, his eyes filled with tears and a gentle smile on his lips.
I knew from the beginning that there was something special about you, Grace. I saw it in your eyes, the same eyes as your father's. He would be so proud of you.
Miguel was next, standing up with a bit more hesitation.
You believed in me when no one else did, and you showed me that there was still hope for this store. I will never forget what you did, Grace. And I'm with you for whatever you need.
Anna, her voice choked with emotion, also stood up, holding Grace's hands in hers.
You brought back something that was dying inside all of us. This store, this family, wouldn't have survived without you. Thank you for being strong enough to follow your heart, even when everything seemed impossible.
One by one, the other employees began to stand up, sharing their own stories of how Emily had touched them, renewing their faith in the store and in themselves. The room, once filled with tension and silence, was filled with emotions, tears, and finally, applause. Grace felt the tears streaming down her face, but this time they were tears of relief and joy. Thompson's was not just a store, it was a family, and she finally felt she had found her place in that family. Her father's legacy was safe, not just because of her, but because of everyone there. The room, now filled with emotion and unity, marked the rebirth of the Thompson family, stronger and more united than ever. The Thompson store was about to undergo a complete transformation, not just in terms of appearance, but in essence. With Jack out of the picture and the staff's confidence restored, Grace knew it was time to take the next step. The store's renovation plan would become a true community project, something that reflected her father's legacy and the impact he always wanted to have on the lives of those around him. Grace called a meeting with all the employees, this time without the disguise of Emily, but as the true heir to James Thompson's legacy. With the support of Carlos, Anna, Miguel, and so many others who now trusted her, Grace laid out her vision. Each department of the store would be rethought, not just in terms of profit, but in how it could better serve the community of Worcester.
My father always believed that this store should be more than just a place to buy clothes and shoes.
Grace said, her voice firm and passionate.
He wanted it to be a place where people could find support, hope, and dignity. Let's bring that back.
The enthusiasm grew as ideas began to flow. The women's clothing department, for example, was reimagined to include a line of affordable fashion for women in financial difficulty, with a donation policy that would allow anyone to access quality clothing, regardless of their economic situation. The footwear department proposed creating a recycling and donation program for shoes, where gently used shoes that were no longer sold would be donated to local shelters. Each employee became deeply involved, sharing their skills and ideas to contribute to the project. Grace worked side by side with everyone, from reorganizing shelves to discussing new suppliers that aligned with the store's values. In this process, she forged deep connections, not only as a boss, but as part of a team that shared a common dream. Every step taken was a reflection of her father's philosophy. The store was, above all, a place of care and mutual respect. Months later, the store was ready to reveal its new phase. A large charity event was organized to mark the reopening with a fashion show at the center of attention. But this would not be an ordinary fashion show. Anna, now in remission and with a new energy in her life, was chosen to lead the event. She had the idea to turn the show into a celebration of strength and survival, where the models would be cancer survivors and local heroes who had faced personal challenges. On the night of the show, the store was illuminated with new life. The windows glowed with vibrant colors, and inside people crowded, eager to see what Thompson's had in store. The stage was set in the center of the store, and the lights focused on Anna, who entered confidently, leading the group of models. Each person walking the runway had a story of overcoming adversity, and as they walked down the makeshift runway, the audience erupted in applause, moved by the stories of strength and courage. Grace was among the crowd, watching with tears in her eyes. She felt immense pride seeing Anna on stage, radiant and strong, far beyond any professional relationship they had ever shared. Here was a woman who, despite the adversities, had found the strength to fight and, more than that, inspire others to do the same. The show was not just about clothes, it was about lives, about the community that the Thompson store had always sought to support. When the show ended, the audience erupted in applause, and Grace knew they were on the right track. The store was becoming the heart of the community again, a place where people found more than products, they found meaning and belonging. On the eve of the store's official reopening, after the charity event, Grace decided to do a final inspection before closing the store for the night. As she walked through the aisles, touching the shelves and observing the results of everyone's hard work, she felt a peace she hadn't felt in a long time. However, something caught her attention, a drawer in her father's old office that had never been opened. With trembling hands, Grace opened the drawer and found an aged envelope with her name written in a handwriting she would recognize anywhere. It was a letter from her father. She sat in the chair where he had spent so many hours and, with her heart racing, opened the envelope and began to read.
My dear Grace.
The letter began, and Grace felt tears starting to form.
If you are reading this, it means the time has come for you to look inside yourself and find the strength that has always been there. I know life has been difficult, and I know you have always questioned whether you were strong enough to carry the weight of this legacy. But let me tell you something. You have always been stronger than you believed.
Grace had to pause for a moment, absorbing her father's words. He always knew what she felt, even when she couldn't express it. She continued reading.
The Thompson store has never been just a store. It was the place where I found my purpose, where I met wonderful people, and where I could make a difference. But above all, Grace, the store was not my legacy to you. You are my legacy to the store.
The tears finally fell, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, of love, and of a deep understanding.
I have always believed in you, and I knew that when the time came, you would find your way. Remember, my daughter, what matters is not the building, the clothes, or the shoes. What matters are the people, the lives we touch. And you, Grace, have always had that gift. Trust yourself and know that I am always with you in every decision, in every challenge. With eternal love, Dad.
Grace clutched the letter to her chest, feeling her father's love and support more than ever. That night, as she locked up the store, she knew she had finally found her place in the world. She was not just continuing her father's legacy. She was creating her own with the love, compassion, and strength that he always knew she had. The Thompsons was being reborn, stronger and more connected to the community than ever, and Grace knew her father would be proud. 1 year has passed since Grace took the reins of Thompson's, and the store has become more than just a shopping center. It has become a true beacon of hope for Worcester. The transformation was not only physical but spiritual, and this was felt in every corner of the community. To solidify the impact her father always dreamed of, Grace launched the James Thompson Foundation, an institution dedicated to supporting small businesses and nurturing local dreams. At the inauguration ceremony, Miguel, who had been one of the first to believe in Grace, was announced as the first beneficiary of the foundation. He would receive a full scholarship to study design, a dream that once seemed unattainable. Upon receiving the news, Miguel couldn't hold back his tears, while Grace, emotional, knew that this was just the beginning of a new cycle of hope and fulfillment. Months later, the store came together once again for a special occasion, this time for the inauguration of a new children's wing dedicated to Carlos, the head janitor who had passed away just a few months earlier. Carlos, who dedicated his life to the store and the community, left a legacy of kindness and care that would now be perpetuated for future generations. The ceremony was simple but deeply emotional. Carlos's 6-year-old granddaughter cut the red ribbon inaugurating the wing, symbolizing the continuity of generations and the lasting impact of a life well lived. As the little girl cut the ribbon, Grace felt a lump in her throat, knowing that Carlos's spirit would live on forever in Thompson's. That same night, after a long day of celebrations and shared memories, Grace stayed behind to close the store. The silence that now filled the space was comforting, not lonely. Before leaving, she paused in front of her father's old office. In the reflection of the glass, she saw something that made her stop, not just her own reflection, but for a brief moment, a glimpse of her father smiling beside her. Grace smiled, feeling a deep peace and connection. She finally knew she had found her place in the world, not just as an heir to a store, but as a guardian of a legacy of love, compassion, and community. Thompson's was not just a store, it was the heart of something much greater, and Grace was ready to carry on that legacy, knowing that with every step of the way, her father would be by her side, smiling with pride. In the end, Grace not only saves the store, but rediscovers the strength that was always within her. She realizes that her father's true legacy wasn't the store itself, but the lives he touched and the lessons of love and courage he left behind. Amid so many twists and tough choices, she finds the balance between protecting the past and moving forward. And you, what would you be willing to sacrifice to protect what you love most? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss any new content, leave a like, and comment on what moved you most in this story. And make sure to click on the card to watch the next recommended video. Thank you for joining us on this journey.